I gave everything I had to help my daughter and her new husband start their life. Every dollar saved from years of sacrifice went into that house. Walls built with the dreams I thought we shared. I wasn't asking for much. A small room, a place at the table, a little respect. But one afternoon, standing just outside their kitchen window, I heard the truth they thought I'd never catch. "She's extra baggage," Josh sneered at a friend. "Dead weight. We'll cut her loose once the paperwork clears." Extra baggage. I stood there, invisible in the home I helped them build, feeling every word brand itself into my bone. What Josh didn't know was that the deed wasn't finished. My name was still inked right there beside theirs. They thought they could cash in my sacrifices and throw me out like a broken chair. They were about to learn that the woman they called baggage was the one holding the keys. And when I walked out, I made sure they felt every inch of the weight they tried to leave behind. Emma had always been my pride, my only child, my little miracle. After years of unanswered prayer, I raised her as a single mother after her father walked out before her first birthday. It wasn't easy, but I poured everything I had into her future. Every school play, every scraped knee, every dream she dared to whisper, I was there. I worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and built a modest savings account not for myself, but for her. When she met Josh, I wanted to believe he was the right man. He was polite enough at first, firm handshake, forced smiles, but there was something about the way he spoke, the way he made small jokes at my expense when he thought no one was paying attention. I ignored the warnings. Emma was happy, and that was all that mattered to me. They decided to buy a house, a beautiful 2-story just outside town, with a wide front porch, and enough space for the family they planned to build. Emma hesitated about the down payment. Josh's credit wasn't strong, and their savings were thin. Without hesitation, I offered to help. I pulled from my retirement fund, writing a check so large my hands trembled signing it. In return, we agreed that my name would be on the deed, jointly with theirs. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I needed some protection, some acknowledgement that what I was giving up wasn't small. At first, it seemed to work. I had a small room upstairs, a sunlit corner I filled with my books and sewing machine. I cooked dinners, helped with repairs, and stayed out of their way. I wasn't trying to intrude. I was just trying to belong. But over time, I saw the shift. Josh became colder. Emma became quieter around me, laughing less, retreating more into the small fortress of their marriage. I was no longer the mother who raised her. I was a presence they tolerated barely. Still, I stayed. I told myself it was a phase. That young couple needed space, that it wasn't personal, until that afternoon, when I stood outside the open kitchen window and heard Josh's voice slice through the spring air. "She's extra baggage," he said, laughing. "Once the paperwork clears, she's gone." My heart didn't break at that moment. It hardened, because what Josh didn't know was that the paperwork wasn't finished. My name was still there, carved into every brick and beam of that house. And I wasn't going to be thrown away so easily. After hearing Josh's words, I didn't confront them. Not yet. I needed to be smart, not emotional. The woman they thought was naive had survived a lot worse than a few cruel comments. I spent that night sitting at my small desk in my room, pulling out every document I had tucked away. The mortgage papers, the deed agreement, the checks I'd written. And there it was, clear as sunlight. My name wasn't just on the paperwork. It was sewn into the very foundation of that house. Without my signature, without my consent, they couldn't refinance. They couldn't sell. They couldn't legally shift a single brick without involving me. I smiled for the first time in days. They thought I was baggage. They were about to find out who was really carrying the weight. Over the next week, I observed them closely. Josh strutted through the house like a king. Emma, my sweet girl, smiled less and less. She cooked dinners, kept conversations light, but I could see the unease in her eyes. She knew something wasn't right, even if she couldn't or wouldn't say it aloud. Then came the final straw. One evening, they announced they were planning a renovation project. New kitchen, expanded living room, an outdoor patio. They wanted to refinance the house to pull out equity. "It'll make things easier," Josh said, flashing me a grin that didn't reach his eye. "And we'll need your signature to move forward," Emma added, her voice too bright, too practiced. I looked at them across the dinner table, the same table I had helped them buy, the same one we celebrated Thanksgiving on 6 months ago. "I'll think about Josh's jaw." Emma smiled. They thought they had me cornered, that my love for my would make me sign away everything a second. But love isn't blind, not anymore. The next morning, I made my move. I visited the real estate attorney who had helped draw up the original paperwork. We spent 2 hours reviewing my rights, outlining my options. By the time I left his office, I had a plan that would leave no room for misunderstanding. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to act. Because if they truly thought I was extra baggage, they could try carrying full weight of their decision without me. 2 days after my meeting with attorney, I sat down with Emma and Josh in the living room. The same living room I had helped paint, furnish, and make a home. They looked eager, expectant. Josh even wore his good polo shirt, the one he only pulled out when he needed some. I slid a manila envelope across the coffee table. Josh reached for it into Christmas present. His face changed quickly as he scanned the documents inside. "What is this?" he snapped. I stayed perfectly. "It's notice that I'm exercising my legal rights to withdraw my share of equity and force a sale of the house unless we reach a buyout agreement within 30 days. Emma paled. Josh turned a shade of red I didn't know was humanly possible. "You're bluffing," he said. "No," I replied evenly. "I'm protecting myself." Emma leaned forward, her voice shaking. "Mom, please. We can fix this. We didn't mean anything by it. Josh was just venting that." I looked. "You didn't," sighed Josh, shifting tact. "Think about Henry and Sophie. The kids need stability. You wouldn't take their home away." I met his gaze, flinch. "You thought of that after you called me extra baggage?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. I stood up, smoothing my palm. "You have options. Either buy me out, full appraised value, or the house goes on the market. I'll get my share either way." The weight of their betrayal hung heavy, but I didn't bend. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. For the first time in a long time, the fallout. Emma called me later that night, sobbing. She begged me not to go through with it. Promised things would be different. Said they'd find another way to honor my part without involving a formal sale. I listened, and I loved her. But I didn't waver. Because apologies that only come after consequences aren't apologies. They're negotiations for comfort. Josh emailed the next morning, an official offer. It was laughably low, insulting enough that my attorney chuckled when he read it. We countered, and when they realized I wasn't backing down, the real panic set in. Suddenly, Josh wasn't so smug. Emma wasn't so dismissive. They wanted meetings, compromises, reassurances, but the bridge had burned. The house appraised higher than they expected. Much higher. Buying me out would drain their savings, leave them scrambling for loans they could barely qualify for. Selling the house would cost them even more. Closing fees, moving costs, public embarrassment. Exactly the consequences they had never imagined when they treated me like disposable cargo. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply watched as reality set in around them. The home they once thought was their triumph was now a chain around their ankles, and it was a weight they'd have to carry without me. It's a strange thing, grieving for people who are still alive. Sitting in that house, hearing the walls echo tense silence, I realized I wasn't mourning loss of a home. I was mourning the daughter I thought I knew, the relationship I thought we had. Emma wasn't cruel by nature. I knew that. She had been kind, once, gentle, but somewhere along the way, she let Josh's resentment stain the edges of who she used to be. Maybe it was easier to turn a blind eye than to stand up. Maybe she truly thought I was a burden, something to be managed rather than loved. That was the part that hurt more than anything. The quiet choice to see me as an obligation rather than family. I spent nights thinking about whether I was doing the right thing, whether standing up for myself was tearing a deeper hole in a bond already fraying. But every time I doubted, I came back to the same truth. Love without respect isn't love. It's duty dressed up as devotion, and I deserved more than duty. I deserved to be more than a line item in someone else's mortgage plan. So I stayed the course. I filed the papers. I let the process unfold. And somewhere in that painful, necessary distance, I found something surprising. Peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. The day the house officially went on the market, I packed my things quietly. I didn't slam doors or leave notes. I simply gathered what belonged to me, the framed photos, the quilts stitched by my mother's hands, the books I'd collected over the years, and walked out without looking back. Emma watched from the porch, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Josh wasn't there. I suppose he didn't have the stomach for it. I didn't expect a goodbye. I didn't need one. I moved into a small cottage across town. It wasn't fancy, but it had a garden and a porch swing. And most importantly, it was mine. No shared deeds, no tense dinners, no strained conversations wrapped in false civility. Just peace. Real, earned peace. A few weeks later, the house was sold. They didn't get the price they wanted. In fact, after fees and payouts, they barely broke even. I received my rightful share, wired neatly into my bank account. I didn't send a message. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. The next Sunday, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset when Emma's car pulled into the drive. I stayed seated, unsure if I should hope or brace myself. She got out slowly, holding a small basket, my favorite kind, filled with homemade bread and a jar of honey from the farmer's market. She stood awkwardly at the foot of the porch, like a guest unsure if she was welcome. "I thought maybe we could have tea," she said, voice softer than I remembered. I nodded, motioning for her to come up. We didn't talk about the house, or Josh, or the cruel words I overheard that day. We talked about the weather, about the flowers starting to bloom, about Henry losing his first tooth, and Sophie learning to ride her bike. It wasn't a full repair, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was something. And for now, that was enough, because sometimes, starting over doesn't mean rebuilding what broke. Sometimes, it means planting something entirely new and letting it grow without rushing it to bloom. For a little while, it seemed like Emma and I might find our way back to each other, one small step at a time. She started visiting on Sundays, sometimes with Henry and Sophie in tow. We baked cookies, planted herbs, and I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something better than what we lost. But peace, I've learned, is never given freely in families built on shaky foundations. About 2 months after the house sold, Josh resurfaced. Emma arrived one evening, her face tight and worried, carrying an envelope. She didn't want to hand it to me, I could tell. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed it on my kitchen table. He's suing, she said, barely above a whisper. Josh, he claims you forced the sale, that you manipulated us. I stared at the envelope like it might bite. I already knew what it would say before I opened it. Some concocted grievance to paint me as the villain, because the narrative of the grateful, quiet mother-in-law hadn't played out the way Josh envisioned. Emma wiped her eyes quickly. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was going to do this. He's angry about the money. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the girl I once held when she was small and scared and looking for someone to fix the broken things in her world. But I wasn't that fixer anymore, not for her and not for Josh. I opened the envelope, skimmed the papers, and handed them back. Tell Josh to talk to my lawyer, I said calmly, and if he's smart, he'll drop it before he makes things worse. Emma nodded, shame coloring her cheeks, and left without another word. That night, I sat on the porch, staring out at the stars. I thought about all the times I had bailed people out, smoothed things over, swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. And where had it gotten me? Erased, disrespected, betrayed. Not anymore. The next morning, my attorney filed a response. Swift, professional, ironclad. Every document was in order. Every decision is legally sound. Josh's lawsuit was flimsy at best, a tantrum dressed in legal jargon. It took 2 weeks for the court to dismiss it, and when I heard the news, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just free. Free from the expectation that love means surrender. Free from the lie that being needed is the same as being valued. A week later, Emma returned. No envelope this time, no tears, just a woman standing on her mother's porch, unsure if the door was still open. I left him, she said simply. I can't live like that anymore. I didn't react. I didn't rush to hug her or praise her courage. I let her words hang there, giving them the weight they deserve. I'm sorry, Mom, she said, voice cracking, for all of it. For the first time, I believed. I led her inside, made tea, set out 2 cups. We didn't rush into old habit. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. We started something new, something slower, something rooted in truth. And as I poured her tea, I realized I hadn't lost my daughter. She just had to find her way, not to the version of me that gave endlessly without question, but to the woman who finally knew her own. The weeks that followed felt different. Not healed, but healing. Emma called more often, not because she needed something, but just to talk about Henry's new fascination with dinosaurs, Sophie's attempts at baking cookies, the little cracks of life that once would have slipped past us. One afternoon, she asked if she could bring the kids over to spend the night. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't a favor disguised as necessity. It was simply an invitation to be part of their lives again, without conditions, without obligation. I said yes, but carefully, slowly. I had learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering everything clearly and choosing peace anyway. That evening, as we sat in the living room, the kids sprawled across the floor, coloring. Emma glanced around. You really made a home here, she said, her voice soft, almost reverent. I smiled. Yes, I did. She looked down, twisting nervously. I used to think that if you stayed small, if you didn't too much, everything that asked was enough to keep it. She looked, her eyes brimmed with tears. I see it. You deserved better. Treated. I reached and placed my hand. No grand, no dramatic music swelling, just a quiet, proud of you for seeing it. And I meant. Emma had learned the hardest lesson has to offer. Sometimes you don't realize what's holding until you down and feel the ground shake. Later that night, after the children were tucked into the guest room and the house had been still, I sat on the porch alone, sipping. I thought about the path that led me through betrayal, anger, grief, and how easy it would have been to choose bitterness, to close the door permanently, to write Emma off the way Josh had once written me off. But I hadn't, not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to choose dignity over destruction, to recognize that the woman Josh called extra baggage had been carrying the entire family's weight along. Now, finally, I had set that burden down, and in its place, Something lighter was growing. When Emma and the kids left the next morning, the house felt warm in a way it hadn't for a long time. Not because everything had been magically repaired, but because we had both decided to step into something new, something more honest than before. The legal battles were behind me. Josh was a name that no longer held power over my life or my peace. The house they lost was just a chapter, one they wrote with their own choices. My cottage, simple and steady, stood as a testament to everything I had rebuilt without permission, apology, or regret. Emma called later that week, asking if I wanted to join them for Henry's school play. She didn't phrase it as an obligation. It wasn't about guilt. It was an invitation. I said yes, not because I was desperate to be included, but because I had found myself again, and now I could walk into any room knowing I brought my own light. That's what rebuilding teaches you. Real homes aren't made from bricks and beams alone. They're made from respect, truth, love given freely, not demanded out of duty. And this time, I wasn't walking back into anything broken. I was carrying something whole. Looking back, I realized the greatest gift wasn't regaining my daughter's affection or watching Josh stumble under the weight of his own choices. The real victory was rediscovering myself, my strength, my boundaries, and my voice. It's easy, especially as a parent, to believe that sacrifice is the price of love, that enduring mistreatment is somehow noble, but real love, the kind that lasts, doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't call you baggage or make you feel like a burden. Real love honors your place in the story. I could have stayed silent. I could have signed away my rights and begged for scraps of respect, but I didn't. I chose dignity, full of laughter, visits, homemade pies, and quiet moments shared with people who choose to be there, not because they have to, but because they want to. And if there's one lesson I hope lingers, it's this: you are never too old, too used, or too forgotten to reclaim your worth. Sometimes it just takes walking away from the table where love was no longer being served, so you can build a new table and set a place for yourself at the head. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself, even when it meant standing alone? Share your story and comment. Your quiet strength might be the encouragement someone else needs. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories where dignity, resilience, and justice always